Well, good morning. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're feeling well, and I'm glad you're here today for House Church. Thank you to Ruth who led worship for us today, and I'm so glad we have people in so many different places who are still able to do incredible things to lead our church together, and that we can still gather even though it's online, and we can connect even through the mediums we have, and that we can still learn from the teachings and the life of Jesus. And today we're going to do just that as we continue this Take Heart series. But this week I did something crazy, like just nuts. It was on Friday. I had to run some errands, and I walked out of my house, walked out the door. I got in my car and I just drove places like a madman. I felt like I was Lewis and Clark out there, just discovering all of State Road 54. It was crazy. And it felt like I was on that magic carpet ride of Aladdin, just seeing a whole new world, because there is a lot out there, guys. There's like businesses and there's people and there's things happening. I drove by all these places that were still open, and I was a little surprised, honestly. One of the places that's still open, if you don't know, is Chick-fil-A, because people still got to get that Jesus chicken right now. And I drove by there, and there's like people there, and they're getting food. And there's people that are going to Publix and getting groceries. There were people just taking walks down the street. It was nuts, guys. It's crazy. There's like all these people and things happening all around us. It's so weird. But I have had a hard time. I don't know if you have, but I've had a hard time distinguishing what an essential business is during this time and what a non-essential business is. And I want to say real quick, I am grateful for all of the essential workers who are doing incredible things, whether it's in the healthcare field. Thank you to everybody who is doing the important work of that, or whether it's in law enforcement, all the people who are doing that, the first responders who are doing their best right now to keep things going. Thank you for doing that. This week I talked to a guy over Zoom who was telling me that he is an essential business and how important it is that he continues to work, and how hard it's been for him to continue to work even though things are so difficult right now. And he said, but we're an essential business, we have to keep going. And so I was wondering what he did, and I assumed he was going to tell me that he was some kind of a doctor or a first responder, maybe somebody who worked in food service that was really, really important. And I asked him what he did, and he said, oh, we are a liquor delivery service in New York City. We're essential and we have to keep going. And I gotta say, that is not what I expected to hear. And some of you right now are like, can I get his number? No. But it's amazing because it's hard to define what an essential business is right now, isn't it? It's hard to know what are the essentials. And for us individually, how do we know what the most essential things we need to do are? How do we know what is essential business for us? What does that look like for us? Because maybe you're like me, and right now it feels like time is standing still and it's also speeding along. Like there's no in between. Maybe on a day-to-day basis it feels like there is nothing going on, or there's everything going on. Maybe you feel that way with your priorities, where your priorities used to have a hierarchy and you kind of understood what went where, and now they're all mixed up and they're all jumbled together. And it can feel like the priorities you once had in order are now all out of order. The things you had intact are now all out of whack, and it feels like things are just all over the place. I read this week that there was a study done because businesses were afraid that they would lose productivity as workers started to work from home. And people were starting to get fearful that they would lose hours of work because people would be less productive. What they found is that on average, people working from home right now are working an hour and a half to 2 hours more a day, because there's nothing else to distract us. There's nothing to take us away from work. And we're working from home where everything is just now one big conglomerate of our lives. And the priorities we once had are now all out of order. And it can feel like everything is important and nothing's important all at once, can't it? Or maybe you just feel like you're in a space where you just live out of fear. And whether it's fear for your family, not knowing how to handle this time, whether it's fear financially because you're not sure what the future is going to look like, or whether it's fear physically for this disease that's going around, whatever it is, Maybe you're living in that right now. The question is, what is essential? With all these things happening, what is essential business for us? And today I want to look at this for us. Not just what's essential business for us as people, but what was essential business for Jesus? What did he see as absolutely essential business that had to get done? The most important thing he could do. And today we're going to see another instance where he says this word tharseo, which means to take heart. Because I believe that right now, in the midst of what we're in, we need to be hearing that we should take heart, take courage, have good cheer. And Jesus uses that phrase so beautifully in this story today that we're going to walk through. We're still in Matthew chapter 9. That's where we were last week. But Jesus only says this take heart thing 6 times in the entire New Testament, and this is one of them. It happens twice in the same chapter. But in Matthew chapter 9, it starts in verse 18, and Jesus is back in his hometown of Capernaum. And in Capernaum, it says this in verse 18, he's speaking and teaching, but then it says, while he was speaking, while he was saying this, a ruler came and knelt before him. Now, this ruler we know is a guy named Jairus. We know this because the same story happens in the book of Mark, chapter 5. And Jairus is connected politically. He's also connected religiously. He is an official in the temple. So he's connected politically and religiously. He is very well known, very well established. Jairus is a big deal. And Jesus is visited by Jairus. Jairus comes to him, and he is kind of a celebrity coming to Jesus. And it says that he comes and he knelt before him. He comes and kneels at the feet of Jesus. And he tells Jesus, my daughter has just died, but come and put your hand on her and she will live. So Jairus comes to Jesus, he speaks to Jesus, and notice what he says here. There's a little bit of foreshadowing in this, but he says to him, put your hand on her and she will live. Jairus has no fear in coming to Jesus. He is a big deal. He comes to another guy who's a big deal. He speaks to him as if they're both big deals. And he says, look, you need to heal my daughter. And he speaks directly to Jesus and he says, if you just touch her, she will come back to life. She will live. And so Jesus is now going to follow Jairus to this house to heal this girl. And it actually says in the book of Mark that as he starts to walk with Jairus, that the crowds around Jesus started to crush in on him. The word that they use in Mark is actually the word crush him. That the crowds are literally pushing in on him so hard. There's so many people crowded around him. They're pushing in so hard on him that he is being crushed by the crowds. I don't know if you've ever had this happen to you. I don't know if you've been around people that have crushed in on you. I have children that both like to sit very close to people. And since we're the only people in the house with them right now, they want to sit very close to us all the time. My son, he's a snuggler. That's an official term for the diagnosis he has. He snuggles. He is constantly just up against you at all times. I can't get through dinner without him just leaning up against my arm, holding on to me at different times. No joke, he has interlocked his elbow through my arm, and now he is trying to eat with his arm through mine, trying to eat. This is how close he likes to be at all times. I don't know if you felt this. Recently, I know it's probably not been common for you to be in crowds of people, or hopefully not. But I remember before all this happened, there was this place that you could go to, and it was called Disney World. And it had lots of people that would go to it. Like lots of people could show up at the same time to this place, and you would like all be there together. And a couple years ago, I decided that I would take both of our children by myself to Disney World for like 2 days. And I was gonna keep them in a hotel and let them go to Disney for 2 days with me, just me and them, because Marie had some work she had to do. And guys, not a great idea. And so I took them, and it was the first night we were there, and I thought, you know what? They never get to stay up late because Marie actually cares about bedtimes and like is a real parent and stuff. But I'm gonna let them stay up, and we're gonna watch the fireworks that are gonna happen. Now it turns out we're not the only ones who wanted to watch the fireworks. Just so happens everybody else in the entire state of Florida wants to watch those fireworks happen. And all of them crowd into the square at Main Street to watch Cinderella's castle as the fireworks happen. And so as everybody crowded in, I am now standing there with the two kids and they can't see because of the crowds. So I pick them up, not really thinking about the long-term ramifications of how long I'm going to have to hold them and how long this will take a toll on my spine for the rest of my life, holding these two children as people crowd in around us. And so I'm holding them tightly as I'm getting crushed. And we watch the fireworks spectacular and I'm enjoying it and in a lot of pain at the same time. The kids are having a great time. And when it's all over, I remember looking at the people next to me and then looking at the people next to them and 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 the people next to them until I realized this entire park is just packed into this space. And I don't know how long we're going to be here. And I don't know how long this is going to last. And I don't know how long I can hold these kids. I'm being crushed by these crowds. And I could feel it, the anxiety and the fear and the stress. It all starts to kind of come in at the same time. And I wasn't one of those parents that had like a stroller where you could just mow people down and run people over. You know who you are, stroller people. That you just go for it and you just knock people out of your way because you have a stroller. By the way, TV show idea, it's called Stroller Derby. It's like a roller derby, but instead moms have strollers and they just run into each other as they go in circles. I think it's got potential. But as I'm watching everybody trying to unpack this, I could feel the anxiety in me and the fear in me and the stress in me starting to bubble up. And I could feel that tenseness that comes with this. And Jesus is in the middle of this kind of tension. And not only is he being crushed by the crowd, he's being crunched for time. There is a dead girl that he needs to get to because an important guy told him to. And he needs to get there. There is a ticking clock for him to show up there. And now there's a crowd in his way and people are pushing in on every side. And he's just trying to get to a place to do a miracle. He doesn't need to have this time up against him. He doesn't need priorities that are out of order. He doesn't need to be operating out of fear. And the good thing about Jesus is he never does. If you pay attention to life and the teachings of Jesus, he's not worried about time. If you pay attention to life and the teachings of Jesus, you find that his priorities are never out of order. If you pay attention to the life and the teachings of Jesus, you'll find that we never should live in fear for our families, for our physical health, for our finances. And while Jesus isn't worried about time running out, and Jesus isn't worried about his priorities being out of order, and Jesus isn't scared and going to let fear take over, there is a woman who feels the opposite of that. And she is being crushed, not just by the crowds, but by life. And maybe you can relate to her. And it tells us about her in the next verses. It says, yes, Jesus got up and he went with Jairus, he went with him, and so did his disciples. But just then, a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. Now, this woman, she had 12 years of this bleeding issue. If you're wondering, yes, it means that it was her menstrual cycle, but that this had been happening for 12 years straight. And in our world, we might hear that as a really bad inconvenience because we have ways to maybe deal with that. And I'm not an expert on any of this, but just we might talk about it as more of an inconvenience. In this day and age, this wasn't an inconvenience. This made her an invalid. This cast her out of her own society. She would not have been allowed to be around anyone in her community, anyone in her family. She would not have been allowed to marry. She would have had 12 years of isolation. I mean, think about how long we've been doing this, right? It already feels like we're on year 10, but she's been doing this for 12 years of isolation. If you go back to Leviticus 15, you find that there's a whole chapter dedicated to how women should handle this cycle. And you might look at it and think, man, God is so harsh and he's so severe and he hates women. And that's not why this is such an important point in Leviticus. Really, a lot of Leviticus is about blood handling, but that's because blood isn't just about sanitation, although that's part of it. It's also about sacrifices, that blood sacrifices were how God handled the entire atonement of sin in the Old Testament. And really, blood is even how we see salvation happen through Jesus. That's why this blood conversation is so important. And in Leviticus, what you'll find is if a woman is experiencing this time, this period as it's called, they would experience this and men could not be around them. Women could not be around them. Their own children could not be around them because if they were, they would be deemed unclean. There's a really great book that I reference a lot, and it's called My Year of Living Biblically. And it's by a guy named A.J. Jacobs. And I love the book because it's just so fascinating. But A.J. Jacobs is not a highly religious guy. In fact, he says that he is Jewish in the way that Olive Garden is Italian food. So what he did is he decided for 1 year, he was going to live his life biblically. Meaning he was going to take all 613 laws. Yes, in the Old Testament, the Talmud as it's called, there would be 613 laws. And he would take all 613 laws of the Talmud or the Torah and he would apply them to his life, living in New York City on a daily basis. And so because of these laws, there are laws literally in Leviticus that say you cannot sit where a woman has sat if she is experiencing this time. You cannot touch a woman who is experiencing this time. You cannot lay down where they have laid down. You cannot be in proximity with them. They must stay outside of the city or the civilization until they are done with that time. So he would literally carry a stool with him. And when he would get on the subway, he would unfold the stool because he couldn't sit in a seat where a woman had sat, just in case she was experiencing this. He would literally carry a stool around to the subways in New York. He wouldn't be able to take change from a woman who was giving him change at like a Starbucks because she might be menstruating and he might accidentally touch her. So he would say, just sit on the counter and I'll just swipe it over to myself. I mean, it was crazy. Imagine having to go through that. And this woman, she has sacrificed everything she has because of this 12 years. 12 years of people treating you that way. 12 years of being isolated and insulated because you were found to be unclean. And this is a time where they didn't have Skype or FaceTime to stay in conversation if they were isolated. There was nobody sitting there telling them, no, this is how you work gallery view, or you're on mute, unmute your mic and we can hear you. Nobody's doing that for her. She is literally just isolated and insulated away from everybody else. 12 years of living as though you are an outcast in your society. And actually, in the book of Mark, it tells us that she had already spent all of her money trying to fix this. She had sacrificed her finances because of this. She had not been able to have a family because of this. And her own physical health was in jeopardy because of this. This issue had taken over her life, and it has taken a toll on every part of her. And now she finds herself in fear financially. She finds herself in fear physically. She finds herself in fear of never having or being in contact even with her family for 12 years. And while this had cost her her family, this had cost her her physical health, this had cost her financially, the amazing thing about this woman is she never gives up faith. Even in the midst of all of that, she still has faith. And her whole plan hinges on one idea, and it says that she touched the edge of his cloak. Now, this woman shouldn't have been in a crowd at this point. She shouldn't have been around other people. By all accounts, she should be outside the community. She should not be near others, and she should not be in a crowd that's pressing in on Jesus. Yet she finds a way in hides herself, and touches just the edge of his robe. Now there's a reason this woman would be looking for the edge of his cloak. Every rabbi had an edge to their cloak. We see it all the way back to Exodus, but even in Malachi, we see this word show up about the edges of a cloak of a rabbi or of a priest. And it actually says in that verse, it says, healing will be in his wings. It's a prophecy about Jesus, and that word wings is the same word as edges. That there will be healing in the edges of his cloak. It's a prophecy about exactly what's going to happen in this story. And so she's looking for the edge of his cloak because at the edge of his cloak, there would be these tassels hanging down. Every rabbi had tassels that hung down at the edge of their cloak. And as a rabbi would learn the Talmud, which means the law, as they would learn the 613 laws of the Talmud, they would take those tassels and tie knots. Every knot would represent a different law that they now had learned and memorized and understood. And so there would be 613 knots on these tassels that would be at the edge of his cloak. Now she might be reaching for these because they are the furthest part from Jesus that she could just barely touch. They're hanging down the furthest away from him. She could just barely get her hand on them. And so maybe she's reaching out because these are what she can touch, or maybe she's reaching out because of what Jesus had taught. See, the word Talmud doesn't just mean law in the way we think of law. It also means aim. Like if you were to take a bow and arrow and you were to shoot that arrow, it means aim. So it's not just about what you're against, which is what we think laws are. They're keeping us away from other things. They're what we're against, but it's actually telling us what we're for. And what we see of Jesus' teaching is as a rabbi, he has taken all 613 of those laws and he's boiled them down to 2. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And maybe she had seen this teaching of Jesus and she thought, if I can just get to the edge of his cloak, to those tassels hanging down, then I'll be healed. And it says that in the next verse, her whole strategy is, she said to herself, if I only touch his cloak, I will be healed. Notice she doesn't even think that she is worthy to talk to Jesus or to touch Jesus. Remember what Jairus did when he walked up to Jesus? He talked to Jesus face to face and he said, if you will lay your hand, if you will touch my daughter, then you will heal her. This woman doesn't feel worthy of either one. She doesn't feel worthy to talk to Jesus. She doesn't feel worthy of touching Jesus. She thinks if I can just get to those tassels, to those edges, to those corners, to those wings of healing, that will be enough. And so when she does this, we see actually in other passages that Jesus feels power drain out of him. And I can't explain that part, but it says in this version in verse 22, when Jesus turned and saw her. When was the last time you think in these 12 years this woman has felt seen? Like actually seen. When do you think was the last time somebody made eye contact with this woman? When do you think somebody stopped and looked at her and saw her? And maybe what he saw in that moment was fear. Maybe he saw the fear in her of her physical health, of her family that she's given up, of her finances that are gone. But what's more likely is that he saw her faith. He saw her. Because it says right after that, this great phrase where he says to her, Tharseo, take heart, daughter. Your faith has healed you. Take heart. I know the burdens you're carrying. I know the things you're going through. I understand the pain you're in. I get that you are stressed and worried and fear is taken over. But right now you need to take heart. Take courage because your faith has healed you. And this phrase, we talked about it last week and I'd encourage you to go back and find it if you can. This phrase of your faith has healed you is that sozo statement. Remember that sozo means either salvation or physical healing, but it can mean both at the same time. And he's not just saying, I am physically healing you. He's saying, I am spiritually saving you. That your faith has brought more healing than you ever thought possible. And I'm not just here to heal those physical wounds. I am here to restore you fully, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. That you have been made whole again. That all the things you've been carrying, all the fears you've had, all of those worries are gone now because you have been made whole. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because at this point, Jesus has been walking through a crowd full of people pushing in on him. And that means full of people who are touching him, who are up against him. And if all it takes is brushing up against Jesus to get healed, you would think that literally thousands of people would have left that procession that day and been healed of different things. But we don't hear about thousands of people being healed. We hear about one person healed. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't about being in proximity to Jesus. It was about having faith in Jesus. And while there were thousands of people who would have had a proximity to Jesus, only one had faith in Jesus. And I would say there are so many of us today who are close to Jesus in proximity. We show up at church, we talk to the right people, we do the right things, we might even read the right books. But at the end of the day, we are so close in proximity to Jesus, yet we have so little faith in Jesus. I mean, I would say as a country and as a culture, this is true of us. We know a lot about Jesus. We know how to be near to Jesus. We just don't put our faith in Jesus. And she's the only one who is healed because she puts her faith in Jesus. And Jesus says to her that she is healed, and it says the woman was healed from that moment. If we look at Jesus, he's being crunched for time. He's being crushed by the crowds. He's got people who are realigning his priorities for him. This Jairus guy comes along and takes him somewhere else. He's got people who are dealing with enormous fears of their family, of their finances, of their physical health. And yet Jesus sees this woman as essential business. This is Jesus' essential business. This is what he came here to do. There is healing in his wings. And for you and I today, we might not know where to take our fears. We might not know where to take our worries and our anxiety. We might not know what to do with these shifting priorities in this time that seems to stand still and move so rapidly. We might not know what to do with this. I've talked to so many people who told me this week that they just feel lost, that they just feel confused right now. And we might be in that boat where this whole thing is almost more than we can bear and we don't know what to do with it. And the good news is this thing that we're feeling is Jesus' essential business. This is what he came to do, to show us what it looks like to love God with our heart, mind, soul, strength, and to love others as ourselves. He came to do this work. You and I are his essential business. And I hope that there is good news for you in that. But on the flip side, there might be some of us who right now are walking really quickly through crowds. There would be some of us who are not looking at the people around us, who are living in fear financially, who are living in fear of their families, who are living in fear of their physical health. And they need somebody to care for them, to slow down for just a second for them. And maybe you and I need to show what it looks like to love the Lord our God with all our heart, mind, soul, strength, and to love our neighbors as ourselves during this time. And today you might be struggling with fear financially, you might be struggling with fear about your family, you might be struggling with fear about your physical health. But may we be like this woman, and would we take heart because we can put our faith in Jesus, knowing that we are his essential business. Would you pray with me? Jesus, I thank you for today. I thank you that no matter where we're at physically, that you're with us. No matter where we're at emotionally, you're with us. No matter where we're at spiritually, you're with us. And I pray that if we have things right now on our hearts, on our minds, that we would bring those things to you. That when it feels like our time is running out, when it feels like our priorities are out of order, when it feels like our fear is taking over, we would bring those things to you, and that we would just get in your presence and have faith. Have faith that you would set things right. Have faith that you would see us, and have faith that you would heal us. That he would save us from the things that we're in the middle of. I pray for each family, each person in their homes right now, no matter what they're walking through, that you would be with them, that you would watch over them, that you would care for them. We thank you for your example and for your life. And we thank you that for some reason you love us so much, and that you care for us, and that we are your essential business. We pray that we would be in the business of loving others as well. That we would love you with all of our hearts, with all of our minds, with all of our souls, and with all of our strength, and love our neighbors as you love us. Praise things in your name. Amen. Have a great week. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week as we continue this. Hop on Zoom right after. We'd love to talk with you on Zoom today for just a little bit to check in with you. Have a great week.